Good afternoon everyone, and welcome into my craft room. I'm Sally Bowman. I'm a crafter in the beautiful New Forest, and I'm really happy to be with you almost every Friday, this time 2 o'clock UK time, crafting away with you. We do something different every week. Sometimes it's inky techniques, sometimes I focus on a stamp set, sometimes it might be a one-sheet wonder, all kinds of things. But either way, I'm delighted that you've joined me, whether you're watching me live on Facebook, whether you're watching the Facebook replay, or indeed if you are watching me on YouTube, either today or a day into the future. So we're going to have a lot of fun today. I'm going to be looking at 4 different ways that you can stamp an image with more than one colour of ink on your stamp. Some of these ways, maybe all of them, you will know already, and maybe it'll just be a little reminder, because I don't know about you, but I quite often completely forget about a particular technique or way of doing things, and then I see somebody else do it and I think, oh yes, I haven't done that for ages. So there might be a little light bulb moment for you today as well. So if you're watching me, do let me know if you can hear me okay. I didn't do one of these last week because I went away on holiday, and I'm feeling a little bit rusty today. So yes. Right, let's have a look. I'm just going to look on my iPad and check that everything looks to be how I would want it to be. Looks like I'm there. Okay, I can see Sandy's here and Mary's here, so welcome to you both. Sandy, you're safely home after your travels far and wide. I was very envious of you. It looks like you had a wonderful time. I hope it's not been too difficult to be back home again. And let me know if you can hear me okay. I'm assuming you can. Nobody's saying that they can't, but you never know, do you, with technology? I had to send an emergency message to my daughter this morning, something that seemed to have gone very weird on my text messages. Fortunately, she knows the answer to all my tech questions, and apparently I had pinned somebody in my text. Well, I didn't even know that was a thing, so heaven only knows how I managed to do it without realising, but I did. Anyway, I've unpinned them and everything looks like it's supposed to now, so you never know with technology, do you? Okay, I've got cables everywhere today. Let me try and, there we go, sort those out just a little bit. Right, what is there in the way of news and reminders? Not very much. We're in the last week of the month, which means that probably next week or possibly the week after, Stamping Up will probably throw some new things at us, which is always exciting. We usually get them on the first Tuesday of the month, which I'm looking across at my calendar. Yeah, so that'll be the 4th of October, so something may be coming then, who knows. Thank you, Mary. She says that it's looking and sounding good. That's always great to know and very helpful, thank you. So we're in the last week of the weekly deals. These are where Stamping Up picks some catalogue items and reduces them. They're not all reduced by the same amount. Some are more, some are less, but they're all reductions. And if you have a look over on my website, and in a minute when I put the camera down, I've got my website written out for you, so you can make a note of that if you don't know it already. You'll find that you can have a look over there, have a look under the specials tab, and the reductions will be there. I don't have an order going in the next week, so do order online if you would like things there, because they are only going to be available for a week. So Sandy has just said, if I can find it, she's glad to be home. They had a great time, but 5 weeks in scorching temperatures and very, very high humidity was very trying. She's glad to be back in the cool. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of us are glad that the weather here has cooled down, Sandy, although we didn't have anything like what you were experiencing. I've spent some time, I lived abroad, and August was a horrendous month for humidity. Humidity was pretty much 100% the whole time, and it was absolutely awful to live with. So I sympathise with you there. Personally, I really love a dry heat, but I don't like a humid heat one little bit. All right, so I talked about the weekly deals. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I need to remind you about. Today is the very last day that you can order the Snowfall sampler, and it's the last day that you can book the October Fancy Folds class. So as long as your emails arrive today, I will be able to book you in for those. Next week will be too late. And I think that's it actually. It seems to be quite a quiet week, unless I've forgotten a whole load of things because my brain hasn't quite got back into work mode. All right, I'm going to cover you over. I've got a little bit of a washi tape here that I will just use to cover over the camera lens, so you hopefully aren't too much affected by me wiggling the camera around, although there will still be a little bit of adjusting that I have to do afterwards. So let's just cover you over. Let's change the settings so things are mirror imaged and are round the right way. And then let's just fiddle with my stand and move this down. Okay, I'll still have some cable wrangling to do, I expect, but let's see what that looks like. I'll wait until it comes up on my iPad. And okay, so let's move things along a little bit. That's not very central, is it? And does that give you a little bit more of my grid paper? Let's see. Until my iPad catches up, I never know. No, that's worse, isn't it? Honestly, you would think, I say this every week, you would think I would know by now what improves things. A couple of adjustments there. Okay, that might be as good as we get. Let me just get rid of this cable here, because that's going to be annoying. Now somewhere I've got a clip. We'll see how that works. This is my microphone cable, and it doesn't easily go anywhere out of the way, so I have to kind of wrestle it into submission, but give myself enough slack that I can actually move a little bit. So let's see if that's going to work today. Who knows? I tried changing things again. I'm not sure that's actually any better, is it? All right. So let me pull some bits and pieces out. What I'm going to do today is show you the techniques and then show you a completed sample, because that way I could pack some extra techniques in. If I made all the samples live with you, then that was going to mean that you didn't actually see me do very much. I'm still trying to fiddle here. I'm still hoping that I can give you a little bit bigger grid paper. I'm not sure. I use the same setup every week, and you would really think that things didn't change that much, but they apparently do. All right, that may not be any better, so I'm going to take those away. If you need them back, let me know. I'm not sure that's any better, is it? It's also crooked, which is annoying. So this first technique I call marker to stamp, which tells you everything really. I have some Stamping Right markers here. So these are the water-based markers. They have a round barrel, not to be confused with the Stamping Blends marker. So this purple one is a Stamping Blends. You can see it's got a much fatter barrel, and it's a square barrel. It doesn't roll, whereas this one does. It's shorter as well, and they are marked Stamping Blends. Let's put that around the right way. Stamping Blends and Stamping Right. So do not use your Stamping Blends on your stamps, because first of all, you won't be able to stamp with them because the ink will have dried, and secondly, it'll be a devil of a job to get it off your stamps because it is a permanent ink. So I've just picked 3 colours here that I liked with the stamp I'm going to use. I've got Melon Mambo, Early Espresso, and Granny Apple Green. Obviously you pick your colours depending on your stamp. Now apart from the black marker, which you can get on its own, we sell these markers in colour families. So if you want the brights, the subtles, the regals, or the neutral colours, then that'll give you 10 markers in a pack. And if you choose either of the in colour sets, that'll give you 5 markers in a pack. So you can have a look and decide what you're likely to be most using, which colours you fancy, and pick accordingly. And what I'm going to do is use the brush tip on my marker to colour in my stamp. If you have a look at these, let me see if I can get that closer. And as always, I'm waiting to see what you can see. There we go. Let's move that way a bit. There we go. So this is the barrel of my marker, and you'll see here there is a fat stripe and here there is a thin stripe. And that is your clue as to where your brush tip is and where your fine liner or writing tip is. So you have two separate tips on this, and for this technique you definitely want to use the brush tip. You'll get nowhere fast if you're trying to use this really fine one. Even if you've got fine detail on your stamps, don't try and use that, it just won't work out. So I have this image here, which is from the Nature's Harvest set. It's a lovely set. So I've got this large flower here, and it looks a little bit like an echinacea or a rudbeckia, one of those daisy type flowers, which means that you can use lots of different colours on it. If you're a gardener, you'll know what I mean. If you're not, then just pick whatever colours you fancy, but I've gone with pink today for my petals. And so I've got three main areas on the stamp. I've got the flower petals, the flower centre, and the leaves and stems. So I've got three colours, one for each of those. So I'm just going to start colouring. I'll lift it up once or twice to show you. I'm going to start with the petals just because I feel that gives me a better chance to delineate between the petals and the centre, but there's no right or wrong as to how to do this. You start with whichever area you're going to find easiest. Sometimes it's helpful to have the stamp case close to you, because in some cases, like here for instance, it's not that easy to see where the petals are and where the stem is, and whilst being approximate is generally going to work fine, if you really want the detail, then have that picture close by. It'll save you constantly turning your stamp over. So I'm holding my pen with the brush tip sideways, horizontal, like this. So I'm not colouring in like this. That's going to likely damage the tip of my marker, so I'm going to keep it horizontal and colour like that. And I'll turn my stamp just to help me get the ink exactly where I want it. And you can do this slowly and cautiously, you don't have to hurry. The ink will dry as you're working, but I've got a tip for that. So it's not a problem to work slowly and gently and be as accurate as you want to be. So this is the last of my flowers, so I'm colouring them with Melon Mambo. Now I'm going to do those two flower centres with my early espresso marker. Again, I'm keeping the tip horizontal, and I'm making sure I colour right up to the top of those flower petals because I don't want a gap in between them. Now I've picked quite a big stamp here to give me the chance to really show you the technique, but this will work on any stamp at all, and you can use it on red rubber stamps or you can use it on your photopolymer stamps. It works exactly the same on both of them. So nearly finished with my Granny Apple Green marker. Alright, I think that's everything. I'm just going to hold it up and have a little look, make sure I haven't missed any areas. I don't think I have, although actually, having said that, there's a little bit there that doesn't look like it's got any ink on it. Alright, so now I should have ink on all those sections of the stamp. But as I say, it's probably dry or nearly dry because I've taken a little while, I've been chatting away. So I'm now going to huff on this, breathe on it, and the moisture in my breath will reactivate that water-based ink. And this is why you need a water-based ink, not only so you can get your stamp clean, but also so that you can re-moisten it really easily. And then I'm just going to stamp it on my card here. So you can probably hear that, you can't see it. There we are. So that ink is now moist, and then I'm just going to stamp in the normal way. And here is my beautiful multicoloured image. So if you don't want to stamp this in one colour and then colour it in, this is a way, let me hold it down a little bit, a way to get all those colours on your stamp in just one go. Hi Karen, thank you for joining us. She says it's been a long time since she's been home early enough to check in live. It has, Karen, and I'm very glad that you have. Is today a special day, or has your routine changed to mean that you can watch us live? Anyway, either way, I'm very pleased you're here. So that's my sample, and then I've finished a card here in some different colours just to give you a second look for it. So I've used the same stamp, and my markers for this one were pumpkin pie for the petals, soft suede for the flower centres, and mossy meadow for the stalks. And once I had stamped my flower, so I inked it up with the marker, stamped it, then I ran the card through my die cutting and embossing machine with the time-worn type embossing folder. Now if you want to have an embossed background to your stamped images, stamp first and then emboss, because otherwise if you do your embossing first you will be trying to stamp on a really uneven surface, and that's not going to go well. You're going to get breaks in your stamping and you won't be happy with it. So stamp first, then emboss. And then I've also embossed the background layer is what I meant. I've stamped a sentiment. That thank you is from the same stamp set. It's a really nice kind of vintagey type font. It reminds me of my grandma's handwriting. And then I've added in some of the solid faceted gems in Mossy Meadow, and then I've placed my focal layer down towards the bottom right corner, so I've really got this kind of diagonal going. So there we are, that is marker to stamp. Couldn't be easier, really easy. Colour in your stamp with water-based Stampin' Right markers, colouring the appropriate colour on the different areas of your stamp. Breathe on your stamp once you've finished your colouring just to reactivate that ink, and then stamp as normal, and you get a lovely multicoloured image. Right, so that is that one. Let me put all my bits away, and we'll come on to the second technique. Actually, I'm just going to clean that stamp, because you know me by now, I am not the cleanest of crafters. I am bound to either knock it onto my card or lay my arm across it or something. There we are. So that's got the rest of the ink off that now. So the next technique I'm going to show you also uses the markers, but in a different way. And you get a much more random look to what you're doing. Trying to find all the bits in here. There we are. So for this one, I'm going to use one of my favourite floral sets, Hydrangea Haven. We've had this for a little while now, and it is just so pretty. So for this stamp, we have an outline image, and then we have a colouring in image, and it's this solid image that I'm going to use the technique on. This one, well, actually, having said that, I am going to stamp this in two colours using kind of another technique. So I suppose you could say it's a bumper bonus one. So this is primarily about a technique which is known as thumping, although it's not nearly as violent as that would suggest. But we've also got two colours going on this outline stamp as well, using a different technique that I don't really have a name for. It's just kind of inking up the stamp in a particular way. And if you watched me, I'm not sure how many weeks ago it was now, but I did show you this technique then as well. So let me bring in some card. Oh, I've just cut my nails. I don't like to have long nails, they get in my way, but I've actually cut them really short and I can't pick anything up. I also find when my nails get long I can't pick anything up, so keeping them a happy medium is not easy. All right, I've got my card, I've got my stamp. So the first thing I'm going to do is stamp this outline, and I'm going to use blues for this hydrangea. I can never remember if it's alkaline or acid soil that gives you blue flowers. In our garden we have a beautiful hydrangea bush, and some years it's pink and some years it's blue, and my husband never does anything with it, so I have no idea why it changes, but I know in theory it's to do with the acidity of the soil. Right, so when you have a stamp like this one, and I don't know how easily you can see, but we've obviously got the flower head here, and then we've got the leaves here, and there's actually quite a nice gap under that flower head and before you get to the leaves. And if you have a stamp like this where your separate parts that you want in the different colours are fairly well separated from each other, then you can just carefully ink up using your ink pads. And all I'm going to do is take my ink pads to the stamp like this, and just watch where the edge of my ink pad is hitting the stamp, and stop with this blue ink before I get to the leaves. So I'll put it down and then I'll lift it up and show you. So I'm just tapping this on as normal and making sure that I ink up all those flowers. This is Night of Navy ink. So there's my flowers, and I have actually got a little bit of blue there on that leaf. Now in practice what I do is I just wipe that off with my finger. You could use something like a damp cotton bud, or you could use the edge of your chamois if you've got a chamois. I've also got a little tiny bit of blue on that stem there. So one way or another, just wipe away that ink that is where you don't want it. And then I'm going to bring in my Pear Pizzazz ink pad. This is an old style ink pad. Had you spotted that? The new style ones are actually easier for this because the edge of the ink pad is much closer to the edge of the box. But it's still doable with this. So I'm just going to do exactly the same. I'm just going to ink this up quite cautiously and conservatively so that I can stop the green before I get to where the blue is. So you can't do this on every stamp, but this image is really quite easy to do. There we are. So now I have blue on my flower and green on my stem and leaves, and I'm just going to stamp it, and I'm using a foam mat because this is a photopolymer stamp. Now for the thumping technique, which is really the main point of this, you don't have to have an outline image at all. You just need an image with a fairly good solid area on it. And actually I've missed, can you see where I carefully wiped off the blue ink, but I haven't gone quite far enough up with that. So let me find my markers, which I've got within arm's reach, I think. And we'll just do a little cheat on there. I've been collecting these over the years that I've been a demonstrator, and I now have a full set, but it took me a long time to get them. But I do know that I have a Pear Pizzazz marker. So if I take the fine end, I can just sketch in that stem. There we are. And nobody will ever know that I missed inking it. And this will work beautifully for all your stamping. If you have a little gap in your stamping for some reason, you can just sketch it in with that fine writing tip. It's a little bit of shadowing today. I've actually had to put the lights on in the end. It's so grey outside. I'm hoping that that's not spoiling what you can see. All right, so I've prepared that just because this is the set I've chosen that has a separate outline, but you might well be stamping with a stamp set that doesn't have a particular outline to it, and then you will just go straight onto this second technique. So let's set that aside for a minute. So this piece here is going to colour in my flowers. In the stamp set there is another stamp which colours in the leaves. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to show you on the flowers. So I've got that image here, and what I need is I need an ink pad and a couple of markers, or even 3 or more markers in coordinating colours. So I've got Balmy Blue ink pad here. I've got a Pacific Point marker, and I thought I'd got another one out actually. I need my Night of Navy marker. Let's find that. There we are. I don't want Balmy Blue. So I've got 3 colours here. going from light to dark, and my ink pad is the palest colour. So first of all, I'm going to ink up the stamp as normal. And then I'm going to stamp it off once. Let's just do that on my grid paper. I'm going to cough as well, excuse me. Oh, sorry. Right, stamp this off just to remove some of that ink so it's not going to be so intense when I stamp it. And now here comes the thumping. So I'm going to use the brush tip of my markers again. It doesn't matter which one I start with, but I usually work from light to dark. I'm going to hold it horizontally really loosely in my hand so that I can kind of flick it up and down, and then I'm just going to thump or tap that tip on the stamp. Now to start with, you get kind of little lines. I'm hoping you can see those. But as you work, you can kind of overlap them and crisscross them, and I'm just looking for some areas of this colour randomly across the stamp. Now I could just hold this and colour in like that, but it's very difficult to get random if you're doing that, and this technique looks much better if you use the colour on here randomly. So I'm getting some little marks on their own, I'm getting some patches of colour, and the less you think about it and the looser you hold the marker, the better the end result will be. So let go of a little bit of control here, because it will be all the better for it. There we are. So I've got 3 areas of Pacific Point marker on there, plus a few random marks. And I'm now going to do exactly the same with my Night of Navy. And I will attempt to do a little bit of overlap, but mostly it'll be separate. So I don't want it to look regimented lines like that. I'm really looking for as random as I can manage. Now I will have a few lines like that, but the patches of colour, can you see I'm just turning the stamp as well, and generally just trying to apply the colour, but really randomly. Random is the key here. This technique works really nicely with trees and leaves and florals. It will also work with animal fur. So those kinds of images where naturally you would have different colours kind of blending to form a whole, and where it doesn't matter too much where your darks and lights are. In some cases you want your darks to form definite shadows in particular places, so pick an image which where it won't matter, where you won't have to think about that. So I'm now going to bring back my outline. I've got my stamp. I'm going to huff on this exactly as I did for the previous technique, and then stamp over the top. It's worth saying at this point that this image does not fit exactly on this outline image, which is great because it means wherever you stamp it, it's going to look fab. So don't get stressed about that. There we go. A little bit of breathing on that. And then I'm going to stamp over the top. And what I end up with is a lovely blue hydrangea with variations in colour that are completely random, which would have been quite difficult. Let me try and get this where you can see it and it's in focus. There we are. Would have been quite difficult to achieve any other way, really. There we are. Sorry, it takes me a while to work out where to hold this. I'm not sure that's still in focus. Hopefully that's better. There we are. Thank you, Karen. It really does, I think, provide a lovely effect. It'll be different every time you do it. Now, if I wanted to do this again, let's say I wanted to stamp another hydrangea, it's important to clean this stamp off, because when I come to do the technique a second time, I'm never going to get my ink from the markers in exactly the same place again. And it's much better to start off with a clean stamp, and then it doesn't matter. So first of all, I won't be contaminating my markers by, say, picking up navy ink that's left over on the stamp on my lighter marker. And also you get slightly more distinct colours showing, which I think is nicer. While I'm at it, let's clean that outline stamp, and then I have a completed sample to show you. So here we go, this is my finished card. And I'll lift that up to show you. I'm sorry about these tripod legs. I'm going to have to do a little bit of work, aren't I? And make a bit more of an effort to try and sit everything so you don't have to look at the feet of my tripod. But anyway, for the sake of now, here is a closer look at it. So I've embossed this back layer with the brick and mortar embossing folder. And then I've stamped exactly as you saw me on this piece of card. I used Gorgeous Grape for the outline of the flowers and Old Olive for the outline on the leaves. So that was all on this one stamp. Then with the thumping technique, I used Pacific Point Gorgeous Grape markers on a base of Highland Heather ink, which I stamped off once. And then for the leaves and stem, I just used this solid image here in Old Olive ink, which I stamped off once before stamping over the top of that outline. So that was two-step stamping, which we did here a few weeks ago. Then with the hydrangea dies, you get this little tiny little tag. It's so sweet. So I've just stamped that. I've added the thank you, if I can see it on here, that's in the stamp set. That's in Gorgeous Grape ink. I coloured a piece of the white crinkled seam binding ribbon using my Highland Heather Stamping Blends marker, which is great for colouring white ribbon because you can always have ribbon that matches then. And I use the same marker to colour some of the tiny little pearls, which I've just added on there. I don't know if they're catching the light. I think if I hold this up much further, it'll go out of focus, but we'll try. And then I used a sponge dauber with some Highland Heather ink just to go around the edges of my card piece there, just so that you could see it against the background. So that is the thumping technique then. Ink up your stamp in your lightest colour, possibly even stamping off, just to make sure that it really is quite pale. And then pick 2 or more Stamping Right markers in the same colour but different shades, so you've got darks and lights, and very loosely just hammer them against the stamp to create patches of irregular colour in a really random way, and then breathe on your stamp and stamp down. So that is the first 2 techniques. Let me see if I can reach the next lot. I'm just clearing things onto the floor and picking it up off the floor, because you know when you're crafting there is never enough space, is there? I'm also just going to drink some of my tea. Alright, so for this technique I'm going to use sponge daubers, and I'm using a large stamp. I'm actually brought my Stamparatus out to use that. Some card. So these sponge daubers come in a pack of 5. They're fairly inexpensive. They last for absolutely ages. You can wash them, so you don't need to have one for every colour of ink. And they are just an easy to hold little tool that will pick up ink and apply it to your projects really nicely. So you can stick your finger in them like that, or you can just hold them. So the stamp I'm using today is this big wave from the Waves of Inspiration set. It's a beautiful stamp with lots of detail on it. The only downside is it's quite big, so it's not always easy to hold it on an acrylic block, because you do need a really big acrylic block for it. So I thought I would use my Stamparatus. For those of you that aren't familiar with this, this is a stamp placement tool. You can also use it in lots of other ways for a whole raft of techniques, which is something for another day. But essentially, instead of an acrylic block, you have an acrylic plate. So my stamp goes on here. This just clicks into the hinges there, so I can lift it up and down, My stamp goes on this side, and then I can stamp down onto my card. This is a magnet. These are incredibly strong magnets, and so I've got a piece of duct tape around it to give me a little tab to get hold of, so I can easily lift it off the magnetic base here. I've got a piece of the small grid paper in here just to make it much easier for me to keep everything clean, so I'm not constantly wiping my Stamparatus, and it also gives me grid lines to keep things straight, which is a huge plus. So I'm just using my Stamparatus today for simple stamping, just instead of a large acrylic block, which is quite hard to hold. If you have problems with your hands, I have arthritis in my hands. If you have other dexterity problems, or maybe you have shaky hands, then a Stamparatus is absolutely fantastic for allowing you to stamp without that problem. The other thing it will do is it will give you more than one go at stamping a beautiful clear image. Let's assume that I ink up my stamp and I miss a little bit. You'll know yourself if you've got your stamp on a block and you stamp, you've got a gap in your stamping. You often can sort that out, actually, as I just showed you on my previous card, by using a Stamping Right marker to just sketch in the extra bit. But sometimes that's difficult. You might not have a marker the right colour. It might be an awkward shape. It might be a big area. With the Stamparatus, your stamp is going to go back down in exactly the same place. There's no looking at it and trying to line it up by hand. It's going to go back precisely where it went the first time. So you can just re-ink your stamp and re-stamp over the top, and you'll get your image perfectly. You can do that as many times as you need to. All right, so I've got just some basic white card. I'm going to put this down nice and straight, and I'm holding it in place with a magnet. And I'm going to pull up my stamp, and I'm going to pop that on here where I think it needs to go. There's quite a large part there before the actual image starts, so I'll try and get it nicely on my card. There we are. So I'm laying my stamp face down, or image side down, on my card precisely where I want to stamp it. And then I'm just going to put the plate on top and just press on it for it to pick up the stamp. So this has now effectively become my acrylic block with a stamp on it. So now I'm going to ink up my stamp in a base colour. So I have 3 colours here for my wave. I have Coastal Cabana, Bermuda Bay and Pacific Point. So I'm going to pick my lightest colour and ink up my stamp. Let me try and bring that across a bit. And because this plate is angled down, I like to put a stamp box, I should say, underneath it to hold it horizontally so it's not actually angled down. And I'm trying to get this so you can see everything I'm doing, which I think is about there. Right, so I'm going to just ink up this stamp by taking my ink pad to the stamp and just ink it all over as I normally would. So then I'm going to add ink in 2 other colours using the sponge daubers. And the reason I've picked the lightest colour to go on here first is as I'm applying the extra colour, I may be picking up some of that lighter colour, and it's less likely to be a problem and contaminate my ink pad if I go back in there with the dauber if I've started with a colour that's lighter. So this is Bermuda Bay. So I'm simply going to press my dauber down on the ink pad, and that's picked up plenty of ink, and then I'm just going to apply that Bermuda Bay over the top of my stamp. You can do it completely randomly, or you can think about the placement. I'm going to go pretty random, and then I usually just wipe this off on the grid paper a couple of times just to make sure that I'm not really contaminating it, but that's not really an issue with this because the ink I'm applying is darker than the one that's already on the stamp. And as I apply the ink, I'm just pouncing it straight up and down, so I'm not really wiping, I'm just going down and up, and that's going to apply the ink really nicely. And then I'm going to bring in my darkest colour, which is Pacific Point. I've got a different dauber because I don't want to get lots of turquoise in here, and then I'm just going to add some of this darker ink in patches. This is much more contrasting, and you may even be able to see that on there. If I lift this up, you may be able to see the different inks on the stamp. Waiting for my iPad to catch up. There's a really long delay today. There we are. Okay, and the last step is once again to breathe on this stamp, because the first ink I put on there from the ink pad may well have started to dry, so I do want all of those inks to transfer. It's a little bit more awkward with the Stamparatus, but I can just pick up the plate, breathe on it, and then pop the plate back. That stamp is going to be exactly where I put it in the first place, and then I can take as much time as I need to press all over this really large image. If my fingers are hurting, I can press like that. There's no danger of that stamp moving, so this really is a brilliant tool. There we go. And that is my finished image. So I don't know how well it's showing on camera. You can almost certainly see the Pacific Point, that bright blue. Then I've got some Bermuda Bay here, and next to that I've got the Coastal Cabana. So Bermuda Bay is there, Coastal Cabana patch, and so on. So again, this is a lovely technique to use with all kinds of stamps. Again, floral images or trees would look lovely done like this. Landscape images, anything like that. You're not going to be as precise with your colour placement with a dauber as you are with a marker, but you're certainly going to get a really, really nice result. So let's just pop that stamp away. Move the Stamparatus, and then I will show you the project that I finished off. Which is here. So I used the same colours on my wave this time. I used the little seagull image, and I stamped it on my white layer using Pacific Point, and I also, I hope it's showing, stamped it on my card base, which is Coastal Cabana card, in Versamark ink here. So I've got a kind of a tone on tone effect. So Versamark's not just great for heat embossing, but it will also magically transform into an ink that is exactly the same colour as any coloured card you use it on. So I've got the seabirds repeated there, and then this Happy Birthday is also in this stamp set. And my matting layers are Bermuda Bay, just to pick up that deep turquoise from the wave. I think this will make a really nice man's card. So I haven't blinged it up, there's no ribbon, I've left it fairly plain, but the detail on this wave is just gorgeous. Having just come back from a week in Cornwall, we saw these beautiful rolling waves on the beaches every day. And actually the colours were just like that when the sun came out. It wasn't sunny every day by any means, but when the sun did come out, there were these beautiful turquoise colours. So that is applying colours to your stamp using sponge daubers. So Karen's a lovely blend of colours. Thank you, Karen. And actually, while I've got some inky sponge daubers here, just as an aside, let me just show you how easy it is to use them to edge your card here. So there's plenty of ink left on here. So I always hold my card up, and then I'm going to scrape the edge of the sponge dauber down against the edge of my card like that. And then you get that lovely inked finish. You can always go back if you've got any bits that look a little bit more uneven than you would want. That really needs to go on something, doesn't it? Hang on, let me put it onto another piece of white. There we go, that'll show it better. The temptation with sponge daubers is often to put your card down on the table and press along like this. I've seen so many people do that because it seems like the obvious thing to do, but actually you end up with this kind of scalloped edge. Now you can, of course, very carefully create an inked scalloped edge, but mostly what people want to do is to have something more like that. So that's the key. Hold your card up and scrape your sponge dauber across the edge at right angles, and then you will always get that lovely random shaded effect. All right, I'm just going to clean the worst of the ink off these before I put them away, and then we will move on to the very last technique, which is rock and roll. So yes, once upon a time I did start to learn a little bit of rock and roll dance. I was never being thrown around the room or anything so exciting, but it was great fun. However, this is a different kind of rock and roll. Alright, so for this I'm actually using this stamp set, which is from one of our kits. It's from the Sentimental Rose kit, which is a beautiful kit with some really pretty cards in it, and the stamp set that comes with it is fantastic. Honestly, you'd pay pretty much the £18 that the kit cost me just to buy the stamp set, wouldn't you? So the fact that it comes in a kit is a bumper bonus, because I got a mini ink pad and a block and all the stuff to make the cards as well. And this is a brilliant stamp set. We've got thank you, happy birthday, best wishes, congratulations, thinking of you, for you, all key phrases that we use all the time. And then you've got the bonus happy Mother's Day. Then there's this really pretty old-fashioned rose, a little rose leaf, and then just a little shading piece there. So it's a fantastic stamp set. If you haven't treated yourself to that kit, I highly recommend it. So I'm using the rose flower for this technique, and I have two ink colours here. Now I'm using Real Red and Merry Merlot. You want, generally are going to want two colours in the same family, so reds or blues or greens or what have you, but that's not a hard and fast rule, and it will depend on your image. And you want an image that is has some detail on it, so not just I don't know, a circle for instance, but an actual image that's pictorial, that has some details on it, and is at least partially solid. If you use a completely outline image, there isn't enough ink picked up to really show the different shades I have found. Now, of course, try your own stamps and see what you think. But for me, I like a stamp that is at least partially solid, which this one is. So this one isn't entirely solid, but it does have quite a lot of shading on it. So let's bring in some card. And because it's a photopolymer stamp, I've got a stamping mat here. And I'm going to start with my lighter colour of ink, and I'm just going to ink up my stamp as normal. So there we go, that's the Real Red on there. And then I'm going to rock and roll it with Merry Merlot. And to do that, I'm going to put my stamp down on the ink pad so that just some of the edge makes contact, which will mean I'm holding it at an angle about like this. What's that? So about 45 degrees or so. The flatter I hold the stamp, the more of my second colour ink will hit the stamp. So for me, I'd like that dark ink around the edges, but I certainly don't want it right across the stamp, otherwise there's not much point in using two colours, because the dark colour will completely outweigh the paler one. So I'm going to hold it at about 45 degrees, and then I'm going to rock and roll the stamp around like that in my hand. So I'm just manipulating it so that it moves around in a circle, and I ink all the edges, whilst hopefully the centre never coming into contact with my second ink pad. So let me show you that. Be prepared to practice a few times, but it's not really very difficult. And if you've got Stampin' Up acrylic blocks, they make life a lot easier because they have these finger notches along the side, so you can get a really good grip on them and they're not going to fall out of your hands. So I'm going to start off, lay it on my ink pad at a 45-degree angle, and then I'm just going to roll it so that all the edges of the stamp make contact. So that 45-degree angle is kind of rotating all round. Now you may find that your stamp block gets messy. Unless you're going to rock your stamp a lot when you stamp, that shouldn't actually matter. I'm going to huff on this just to make sure that real red ink is nicely activated because it's been sitting on there a while, and then I'm going to stamp in the usual way. And if I lift that up, you can hopefully see that we have a stamp, a rose with darker outer petals. Let me, oops, hold that a little bit better for you to see. Have I moved that the right way for you to see better? I think I have. Yeah, no, I haven't. I've gone the wrong way. Sorry. It's always waiting for my iPad to catch up so I can see what you can see and I can see what I've done wrong, and then I can correct it. There we are. That's better. Okay, so the reason you ink up first of all in the lighter colour is, as we've said for some of the other techniques, if I get real red ink into my Merry Merlot, this ink pad is much darker than the real red, so it's not really going to cause a problem. However, if I got Merry Merlot ink into my real red ink pad, that would definitely leave me with dark patches, so I don't want to do that. And as before, if I'm going to stamp another rose, I definitely want to clean my stamp off first, because when I rock and roll it for the second image, I'm almost certainly not going to get the Merlot ink in the same place as I did the first time, and so again we're going to end up first of all with muddy colours, but also with ink contamination when I stamp it into that real red layer first of all. So two good reasons to clean your stamp in between. So I've got a finished sample of this for you as well. I'll give you a moment to have a look at it and then I'll explain what I did. So I rock and roll stamped my rose onto this layer, and then I stamped a second one on some spare card, and I cut out just this central area. And if I tip that, I'm hoping you can see that I did a little bit of decoupage. I layered it up on some foam pads just to give some depth. Don't know if that's showing or not, but anyway, believe me, this is a 2-layer flower. I did the same with the stamped leaves. I cut those out and applied them with some foam pads as well. So there's lots of kind of layering and texture on this. I painted over the top of my flower with Wink of Stella. I think the light is catching that, and I also spattered some onto my card layer. I matted that onto Merry Merlot card with just a really narrow border, because I wanted this to feel like quite a clean and simple card. It's not really clean and simple, there's too much detailing and so on it for that, but I did want the white space. So I just had a very narrow border, and then I wrapped around some real red ribbon. This is in the Autumn and Winter catalogue, and it comes in a 2-reel pack, real red and garden green, so it's fantastic for your Christmas crafting because you've got red and green ribbon in the same pack, but I've just used it on this card. And then I stamped the thank you. This is from the same stamp set. Stamped the thank you and punched it out with the double oval punch, and then I punched the scalloped oval in that same punch out with some real red card. My card base is thick white card, thick basic white, and I did stamp the leaves in 2 diagonally opposite corners, and I stamped off each time just so it wasn't quite as vibrant as here. This is Granny Apple Green, so it's quite a vibrant green. And then I finally added a few rhinestones. So that's what I did for that card. Hi Jackie, lovely to have you here. Thanks for spending some of your Friday afternoon with us. And some techniques you didn't know. Wonderful. Well, that's always great. We all like to learn new things, don't we, and add them to our crafting arsenal. All right, so let us have a look at all the cards, and I'll remind you of the techniques. I'm just going to turn this grid paper over. I've got it blue tacked to my desk, so that doesn't make life easy, but I've got all that ink that I scribbled off from my sponge daubers, which is a bit distracting, I think. So let's just turn it over. I'm trying to get the blue tack off it. I'm not sure how successful that's being. Probably I've just moved the camera horribly, but we'll try. We'll see if that helps. Okay. Right, so let me try and do these in order. So this was the first one, and this one we coloured in our stamp using Stamping Right markers, then we huffed on it and stamped, and by using different markers we got more than one colour on the stamp. For this card I also used the markers, but this time I inked up the stamp in a pale colour, and then I loosely held the markers and just kind of hammered the side of the brush tip against my stamp. It's called thumping. You don't really thump, you're quite gentle with it. I used two different colours and tried to distribute the colour completely randomly, and then I breathed on my stamp to reactivate all that ink and stamped down, and that gave me this multicoloured image. Then let's just move that up a bit. For this one, I used sponge daubers. I inked up the stamp in my palest colour, and then I used a sponge dauber, or two sponge daubers, one for each colour, to apply two extra colours of ink completely randomly to the stamp. And then again I breathed to reactivate that ink and stamped down. And then finally the rock and roll, where I inked my stamp once again in the paler colour. There's a bit of a theme there, isn't there? Always ink up in the paler colour first. And then I held the stamp at a 45-degree angle on top of a darker ink pad and rock and rolled it. I rocked it, I rolled it round, and just picked up darker ink on the edges of the image. So I then had two colours of ink on the stamp. I breathed on the stamp and then stamped. So there you are. 4 different ways to get several colours on your stamp, and you only have to stamp once that way. Obviously with 2 or 3, 4, 5 step stamping, we layer up images and you can stamp each of those in a different colour, but not all stamp sets have layered images. So if you have a single image, here are 4 options for you to actually colour in your stamped image with different colours. And actually on the hydrangea we did throw in a bumper 5th technique, which is where I just held the ink pad to the stamp and inked really carefully so that I could ink one colour on the flower, and then I used a different ink pad to ink the leaf, even though they're on the same image. And because there's quite a lot of space in between those 2 areas, I could get my ink pads in there and ink up the base for the outline image, which we also used on that particular card. So Jackie's looking forward to the replay, and she says the rose would make a great wintry birthday card too. That is a brilliant idea, Jackie. It absolutely would. Yeah, sometimes it's difficult, isn't it? You don't want your winter birthday cards to look too much like Christmas cards, but you want something seasonal. So I think you're right. The dark colours and the sparkle on that would make it fun for a birthday card. Right, I'm just going to cover you over and move you back up so I can say my bye-byes. This hour on a Friday afternoon always flies. It goes so fast. There we go. I think that looks about right. Okay. Karen, you are very welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed them, and I hope you have a nice weekend too. And Sandy, you are very welcome. I'm glad you liked the projects and the ideas. So I will be back here next Friday at 2 o'clock. I'm trying really hard to think of a snappy title for next week's session. So far, I haven't got one. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making 3 cards with 3 different layouts, but using the same size and shaped pieces of card for each layout. So yeah, if anybody has a brilliant idea for what to call that, let me know. I'll post the event next week and you'll be able to see whether I or anybody else came up with a snappy title or if it's a little bit long-winded. But it's the same pieces but 3 ways with them. It'll be 3 different layouts using the same pieces. So have a great weekend, whatever you're doing, and I will look forward very much to seeing you again here at 2 o'clock next Friday. Thanks so much. Bye bye.